Hello and welcome back to the Scoop with Coop. I'm of course Coop, and in today's video, there is something that I saw on my Twitter feed that was kind of, interesting. And that was Adam Silver talking about the 65 game rule for players to be eligible to be on all NBA teams, all defensive teams, and to win any type of in-season award. And I think where this issue of what he said as well as what the rule means is I posted a video I believe it was less than 3 weeks ago, where I picked like 6 players who I think are deserving of MVP. 3 of them are no longer eligible. One of them is missed time because he wanted to be there for his children in the midst of a divorce in a foreign country. Another one has a collapsed lung, and another one has, I believe he missed some games due to like a broken bone in his arm. I don't know. But half of those players are not eligible. Players who I thought were all exemplary enough to be deserving of being in the conversation for MVP. And they're not eligible. Someone else is going to take their place on the MVP ballot, all NBA teams, and all defensive teams. And I think that this rule in particular was a massive overcorrection of something that a lot of people consider to be an issue. Because load management is a term that has been used in the NBA for a long time, and I think that it is very much playing on the fears of fans. Because the key components of load management were players like Zion Williamson, Kawhi Leonard, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. Those were players who load management, that is who you think of. And that was back in 2020, 2021. Now looking at this about 5 years later, Ben Simmons is out of the NBA because turns out missing time because of a literal damaged disc in your back is warranted. Joel Embiid, I implore every single person on a human level to think about what injuries that man has had. He's broken parts of the bone surrounding his face and missed time. He's torn ligaments in his knee and rushed back from tearing his meniscus when we can see the wound openly bleeding during games, and he came back. And then you look at Zion Williamson, where does he take the best care of his body? No. But also, in his contract is he's going to play, like he has to play a certain number of games. So if you think he's load management, like he's load managing when his literal bottom line is on the line, no. I mean, it is just, at the time, it makes sense when you think about, stars need to play. Yeah, that is a fair thing to wish for. But the problem with making this rule in effect is players who aren't deserving are going to make all NBA teams. They're going to be able to ask for more money. So at the end, you're hurting the franchises, which, quite frankly, I'm all power to the players. But you're hurting certain players, such as if there's a younger player and he balls out, he won't be able to make as much money because he won't make an all-NBA team. And that instance, we saw that a couple years ago with Tyrese Halliburton, where he was playing through a pretty bad hamstring injury, and he got injured in the playoffs and he didn't play that well to end the year because he had to make 65 games for himself to be eligible to earn money. I don't blame these players for going out there and just suffering, because if there's $40 million, $50 million, $60 million on the line, you have to do that. But I also think that on the other end, you want your star players to play, but I don't want my star player to play if they're hurt. I don't want to force players to be back, and I think that this whole issue, and I use that term kind of loosely because I don't think that stars not playing is that big of an issue. Because if a player can't play, he shouldn't play. I mean, it's that simple to me, and I think that we're really looking over much larger issues in the NBA. And I do think the 65-game rule is absolutely ridiculous because now we're going to see players who, quite frankly, aren't good enough or don't deserve to be on all NBA teams make it. And I think that this particular rule, an example, is very interesting. And I had mentioned before about a quote that Adam Silver said. I'm going to read it. It will be on screen now. But the quote from Adam Silver is, there was a general agreement between us and the Players Association that we need to do something about that. And the result was to have the 65 game rule. Like, could it be 68? Could it be 62? That was the product of a negotiation. But I personally think it's worked. That, along with the player participation policy, there's not nearly as much discussion around load management as there was, in part because the teams and players have responded. You see them on the floor now. So now we have a separate issue that we're dealing with in terms of tanking, and we'll deal with that, and I get it. There's part of my job. There's always new issues, but I'm not ready to say, standing here today, that because there may be a sense of unfairness for one player, that means the rule doesn't work. And I think that looking at, this quote, okay, sure, seems fine. But when you go to the part where it's one problem, half of the players who I deem are worthy to be on the MVP ballot are ineligible now. That is directly affecting the players. That is directly affecting livelihoods. And I think that lying, which I do believe this is lying. I do believe Adam Silver is lying about this. Because I know for a fact that it is not one player. Because if Cade Cunningham decides to go out and play with not a bone bruise, with a collapsed lung, if he is missing time, I think that is fine. He is dealing with an injury larger than basketball. Anybody who is, I think on a personal level, if you've had a setback, whether it be social, personal, you can understand how mentally tough that is, because that's what this is for these players. An injury is a setback. It is a damaging thing for their career. Right now, for their mental well-being, as well as obviously their physical well-being, but also economically. Like these players, they want to play. You don't make it to the NBA if you don't want to play. And so that's when you get things like Charles Barkley saying, well, the players just don't want to play as much as they want to. Okay, as much as the previous generations. I think that's just false, and I think he's also lying. And there's a whole other problem in the NBA with past eras bashing on current eras, but we'll deal with that in a later video. And so looking at the man who gave this quote, Adam Silver, and Adam Silver is I was about to say he's a new owner, but he's really not, because he's been in the league for a decade now. His first major action was banning an owner for life because of racism. This is an owner a commissioner, who set the precedent of being very reactionary and quick about things. And I think that there are pros and cons to that, because he mentioned in here tanking. I think tanking is a non-issue. I do not believe tanking is a problem. Because the way that the NBA is set up compared to other sports, you need to tank to get good players, because they're not leaving in free agency. Very rarely will you get a player who he alone will change your fortune. That just doesn't happen. And I think that looking at past examples in the most popular teams ever, just for like a few years, who doesn't talk about the 90s Bulls? That team was made by tanking. I mean, you don't think that Bulls team, it was just truly disgusting to watch, wasn't tanking? I promise you they were. If you go on NBA 2K right now, you go to My Eras and you go to the, I believe it's in the Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson era, and you click on that Bulls team, they are horrible. And I promise you, you can't name more than 5 players on that team. You look at other examples. The Cleveland Cavaliers in 2002, because LeBron was drafted in 2003. They were horrible. Absolutely disgusting. And no one's going to go to Cleveland in free agency. So that's how you build. The most popular players in the draft process go to the best teams. Or go to the teams that are at the bottom of the lottery, so the best of the worst teams. And to overcorrect on tanking just seems absolutely ridiculous. And I think that, as well as the 65-game rule, these two things that have just been massively overcorrected have kind of wanted me to think a little bit. Since Adam Silver has come into the NBA, has this been a better product? And my answer is no. I don't think the NBA has been better once Adam Silver arrived. Because when I started watching basketball, right, I started following in the 2010s and then really got into it heavy about half a decade ago. So I've been, Adam Silver has been the commissioner for all of my time, basically being like a hardcore, like I'm following the game. And there are so many problems with the NBA. I mean, there are so many. When Adam Silver came into the league, viewership was fantastic. You had the stars. You had this up and coming team, the LA Clippers, right? Finally making it a competitive ish market for LA, right? And the NBA was fantastic at around that time. There were still a lot of problems, but it was great. And then Adam Silver seems to come in. Now, I don't want to necessarily say that Adam Silver's done everything poorly because I don't think he has. I think he's been much better at the social aspect of players. I think that he's allowed for avenues for players to be better versions of themselves off the court, I think. But I think that when you look at how the NBA is now, it's tough to watch games. Like, I can't watch the closest team to me. I cannot watch a Chicago Bulls game. They're my favorite team, but unless I'm going to pay $200 to watch a pretty bad basketball team, I will have no chance of watching them unless they're playing a good team. If I somehow manage to do, if I somehow am able to watch the game, every single thing is gambling related. Every commercial is gambling, gambling, gambling. And I feel like, I don't need to have that just bombasted down my throat. And I think that there are so many problems with how the NBA wants to approach things. Again, looking at the most popular things, bringing up the second apron, which is, I do like this parody era. I do think it's cool, but also the most loved teams are teams who dominated for a long time. I think that this whole Adam Silver era, where he is just focusing on non-issues and overcorrecting on things that aren't really issues, is alarming. Because especially when a fundamental aspect of the game in dribbling is who knows what a proper dribble is. Because there are a couple times where some dribbles look to be discontinued and then magically it's called a gather step. And I'm going to put a couple of examples on screen now. But I think that just some of this is just like completely ridiculous with how you're able to take 8 steps close to, and it's not called. It's ridiculous. And there are so many problems with the NBA, and I think that this quote here and just making it seem like there's this whimsical nature when it's like, in reality, players' livelihoods are being affected, the product is being affected, because let's face it, the NBA, a lot of people start caring right around now, or right around a month ago, because that's when football's over. Is that fair? No, but that's just the way it is. And so you need to have your stars ready to go, right? And so forcing them to play games when they're not physically healthy enough to do it hurts the bottom line, because when people watch the most, which is the playoffs, if the stars are so beaten up and battered that they can barely play, look at the cases from last year. 2 superstars tore their Achilles, and Jason Tatum and Damian Lillard, because they had to meet that quota. They both tore their Achilles. Damian Lillard hasn't played this year. Jason Tatum's just recently come back, and he's looked pretty good. But you can't tell me that's a positive for the league. There are just so many problems, and to overcorrect on things like this is just flabbergasting to me. Because we're focusing on non-issues, and the actual deep-rooted problems don't get addressed. Before the season, we had a literal coach be involved in a gambling scandal. We had players involved in gambling scandals. But you're going to turn a blind eye to that and just completely think tanking. And you know why I think tanking has been such a massively talked about thing? Because gambling companies don't like it when stars sit out of a fourth quarter. What team has been hit the hardest? The Utah Jazz. You know what the Jazz do? They're players. They play 3/4 of the game. Once that fourth quarter comes, get on the bench. We're putting our young guys in. And that affects gambling companies, because if players, if people who are betting bet the over and they hit the under, that gambling company is at a loss. I mean, cases where, like in the case of the Utah Jazz, they're getting hit so hard because they have players. It's just that they just sit them out the fourth quarter, and their odds are affected because they assume they play the whole game, and gambling companies lose. I guarantee you that is why Adam Silver is trying to overcorrect on this. And for the 65 game rule, I'm sure that it is for gambling on who can be the MVP. I mean, gambling is such a massive part of this league and this game and this sport that it just seems like why is this what we're focusing on? And I mean, I'm not even against sports gambling. I feel you should be able to do whatever you want with your money. But I mean, I feel like there should be some limits on how much impact it could have, because if it's already shown to have had some involvement and proven involvement of affecting the quality of the game, that is where issues arise. If you have Malik Beasley, who he is just betting like crazy and has millions of dollars in debts from gambling, and that affects the integrity of this game, that is where the problem is. But we're turning a blind eye and we're focusing on tanking when the most popular players of all time go on to teams that are actively tanking, and they make money from that. I mean, we're just completely going to fix something, and end up breaking the system and make it to where teams who, let's face it, don't deserve to have some of these players, magically they get the number one pick. I mean, I think that there's so many problems with how this has been approached, from the not focusing on core aspect of the games, making defense just impossible to play now. Because do people like offense? Sure. I like it when offense beats good defense, because that's the pinnacle of sport. I think that looking at, so I've already talked about the dribbling. What is a dribble? What is a travel? I mean, it's ridiculous. And to almost insult the intelligence of the NBA community with this just completely disgusting narrative is sickening. That a sport that so many people love is being ruined because of poor rules, because of turning a blind eye, and overcorrecting on things that aren't necessarily a problem. I love the NBA. I'm rooting for Adam Silver. I know this has been a negative video, but I don't want it to be negative. I remember even a few years ago when the NBA was awesome. I remember that. And I want to get back to that. I want to be able to watch my favorite team play. I want to be able to watch as the playoffs start and players are mostly healthy, because they don't have to play the last 3 weeks of the season with injuries that are tough, and they eventually are going to have to miss time because of it. I want the NBA to succeed. And I feel like what we're seeing here is detrimental to that. This was a very deep video. But this is the Scoop with Coop. Hope y'all enjoyed. Watch some of these videos that you can see on screen. I have to figure out where I'm going to put them. But until next time.